Hi, I'm Jennifer. I teach at University of Missouri, St. Louis, and I also play in a professional duo with my husband, Matt. And I have been talking about different things that I love teaching on the flute. And the last video I did, Intonation, brought up a lot of really great questions. So I wanted to address those today, as well as to take you further into the world of practicing with a drone and what I'm really listening for with some of those interval colors. So if you haven't watched the last video, which talked about intonation and how to use a drone, go ahead and do that because it's super helpful to set up the basics of what we're doing. But today we're going to take it a step further. What I just demonstrated was the first 5 notes of the F major scale. Any scale will work for this exercise. And I'm listening specifically for the 3rd note, which is going to be A in this case, the 4th B flat, and the 5th C. Those are special intervals because the 3rd note will be a major 3rd in a major scale. The 4th will be a perfect 4th, and the C will be a perfect 5th. Those 3 notes, they all produce something called a resultant tone when played against a drone pitch. Now, you may have heard many different ways to talk about this, a difference tone, a resultant tone, or it just might sound like a big buzzing in your ear. And that is an amazing acoustical phenomenon that I will not take the time in this video to explain because it's far too complicated. I'm not sure if I completely understand it, and I'm sure there are people who can explain it better than I can. So go ahead and Google that if you want to. But the important part is that flutists and other instrumentalists use that to help tune their instruments. It's amazing and it works. So I'm going to tell you how to do that today. First off, you're going to choose a drone pitch and play those first 5 notes. And I highly recommend, and I talked about this in the last video, to not use any vibrato when you do this because it is important to listen for the purity of tone. Remember, the most beautiful sound is also the most in tune. And so we're really listening for intonation today and really listening for that purity of tone. So when you have your tonic note, make sure that your first note that you're starting with blends seamlessly into this note. I don't want to be able, don't want to hear any other parts or beats or anything like that. So I'll demonstrate that, what that might sound like. So either you're really too sharp or too flat and it becomes really distorted. So look for that beautiful center of tone. Once you have that, then we're going to go slowly up the scale. And when we hit the 3rd, we're going to listen for that resultant pitch. It's like a buzzing note. Doesn't sound like it really belongs to the scale, but what you want to do is make sure that it's completely focused and doesn't sound fuzzy. If it's completely focused, then you have your major 3rd in tune. So at first my note was a little bit fuzzy. It was a little bit low in the resultant tone. And I just slightly brought the air forward and I brought my lower lip out a little bit to keep that air moving up, and it locked in. So listen for that in your studio time. It's really something you have to experience. I love when my students, when we play together and I will be playing in 3rds and we'll have that moment, they're like, what happened? That's called the resultant tone. It's super helpful, a little confusing at first, but super helpful. Now let's listen for the perfect 4th. The 3rd needs to be a little higher typically. The 4th really has to be exactly where it needs to be. If it's any flatter than a perfect 4th, it's going to sound very off. If it's too sharp, it's going to sound like a tritone. So you have to be very careful with the 4th and the 5th. So let me demonstrate both of those for you with the drone pitch. One thing that really helps is when you're playing those perfect intervals, the 4th and the 5th, listen for that tonic note. If that tonic note just seems to be super resonant, then you have the right pitch. If it seems a little bit fuzzy, like it's not really working, then you need to keep moving up, probably flat. Now, not always. You can always be too high on these, so you got to use your discretion in your ears. But that's just part of how I listen for the color. Each interval has its own color, as I mentioned in the last video. The 3rd, the 4th, and 5th I find are the most pivotal and important in using that resultant tone. If you're working with an ensemble, like say a flute section or a mixed woodwind ensemble, this will work very well. So everyone in the group can listen for when that pitch is completely centered and when that resultant tone is not fuzzy and diffused, but really clear. And you'll get used to that after a while. I remember when I first learned about this in high school, and I thought this was super mysterious and difficult, and it's not, but it does take practice. So that's why I love practicing every day with my tuner, and I'm working on my exercises, and I'm using my tuner as I go and listening with that drone pitch. It's super helpful. Another way you can use your drone, and I think I showed this in our last video, but I wanted to reiterate that because I think it's super important, is you can use this as a tonic note to practice a melody. And I've got a melody here from one of my other books that I love, which is the Moise Tone Development Through Interpretation on the Flute. And this is an example where I would use the tonic pitch. That just means the key that we're in. And in this case, it's going to be D. And I'm going to use it to listen for all the intervals. And I'm also going to listen for the resultant tone. So with my very first pitch, and you'll know this, this excerpt, I think, pretty well. My very first pitch is going to be a third higher than the tonic. And I need to really listen for that. So let me demonstrate that for you. So let's get our D. There we go. There's D. And then here's my excerpt. So right away, I want to make sure that that third is high enough. And it wasn't high enough at first. It was too low. So I want to make sure that I'm really listening for that resultant tone. It's tedious work, but it's so worthwhile because there's so many places in this melody that you can fall into an interval black hole, and you want to make sure that you are listening for all of that quality. Now, when I add vibrato, the vibrato does not distort the sound. We'll have an entire different video that we talk about how to develop vibrato, but good vibrato that's produced in the correct way and used in the correct way on the flute will not distort the intonation or the pitch in any way. It will just bring a beauty and warmth to the sound. So I can do the same exercise, but I can use vibrato and it won't change the intonation, but it will just enhance the sound. Of course, this excerpt usually would be played with vibrato. Using the drone pitch, it has so many applications. I can use it in my etudes, my exercises, in my long tones, in other things in Moise, and in playing melodies and working on sound, and in my repertoire. So enjoy using that drone pitch. Remember the principles of starting without any vibrato, listening for the resultant tone and the color of each interval. And consistency is key. The more you do this, the better you'll be at it. So let me know in the comments if you have any other questions. I actually love talking about intonation. It's one of my things that I practice all the time. And it is always something that you work towards. So it is a journey. So thanks so much for watching. And until next time, happy practicing.